Welcome back to the Motivational Intelligence Podcast, where we uncover the strategies and insights that help leaders transform their thinking, elevate their performance, and unlock new potential. Today's episode is a deep dive into the personal and professional journey of John Casey, a world-renowned leadership trainer and motivational intelligence expert who has worked with leaders across 6 continents in 97 countries and over 40% of the Fortune 500. With decades of experience, John has worked with leaders in every industry from startups to Fortune 500s, helping them achieve really breakthrough results. And what makes John's story so compelling is really his personal journey. From struggling with limiting beliefs early in his career to becoming a sought-after mentor and a speaker who gets on stage in front of hundreds and even thousands of executives at a time. Now, in this candid conversation, John shares the pivotal moments and the mentors who really shaped his thinking, how he overcame those limiting beliefs to unlock his potential, and the power of applying motivational intelligence to lead effectively and live exceptionally. His journey has really been a transformative one. So if you've ever felt stuck and wondered how to break through to the next level in your career or your life, this episode is going to give you actionable insights and inspiration. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with John Casey. This podcast is brought to you by 2Logical, a global top 20 training firm and the world leader in motivational intelligence development. We partner with leading executives to build the #1 talent pool in their industry. We've worked with over 40% of the Fortune 500 in 97 countries worldwide, and maybe we'll work with you next. To try our world-renowned executive coaching service for free, start a free trial of Mojo at joinmojo.com/trial. That's joinmojo.com/trial. You'll get unlimited access to the Mojo platform, custom onboarding, and 2 live coaching sessions free of charge. So, if you want to unlock even greater leadership presence and executive effectiveness, reclaim more of your time, and really build something special, get started with your free trial today at joinmojo.com/trial. That's joinmojo.com/trial.
And the more I studied it, the more I began to see that that was the overwhelming commonality of the most successful people that I ever met.
And just the empowerment of the conversations, how it just really motivates you. You don't come across people that impact you that way.
Because a lot of people could say to me, oh yeah, no, I get it. But yet they really don't get it.
This, if you really lean into it, can be life-changing.
Mojo's is part of our DNA and what we do during team meetings.
And I just looked at Randy like, oh my God.
I feel like that's made a lot of impact in my direct report's life because they're not afraid to talk to me.
But I started to see what this gentleman said in the podcast. And I was like, it was just kind of surreal because it was almost like he foreshadowed what I was going to be up against.
They would come in every week and ask me, Paul, how far would you like to get? That's when I told them 105%. And they laughed and I said, no, 105% is where I'm going to be.
I think that concept is one that everybody can buy into, and saying that I can improve 1% from yesterday.
An unstoppable state of mind that enables you and I to achieve everything that we want out of our professional and our personal life.
So Johnny, good to have you. I've been excited for this conversation. It's been a little bit since we've chatted, and I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a reflective episode if you were up for it. You've been in this game for a bit. You've infused motivational intelligence into people's lives, people's businesses all over the world. Collectively, at this point, I think it's been 97 countries. You've been to many of them. I think you got 6 continents under your belt, if I'm not mistaken. You worked and been retained by 40% of the Fortune 500, been a top 20 training firm in the world for the last 5 years that you've obviously been a huge part of. So I wanted to kind of go back to the beginning and talk about what it was like for you when you first were mentored around motivational intelligence, when you first learned that yourself, what that journey was like.
Well, yeah, that's, it goes back quite a few decades now, but, I was very fortunate to struggle mightily early in my career, I guess, because I was 25 years old and starting my first real job. Well, my first real job that got any traction. I had already had 4 other jobs since I graduated from college that I didn't succeed. 2 I was fired from, and 2 other I left. So I was 25 and not in a good spot, and I was starting to think success wasn't in the cards for me. I was frustrated, a little bitter, and a little envious too. And then, I start my fifth real job, and I start reporting to a guy who actually was one of the founders of the company. It was a small telecommunications company in Rochester, New York, my hometown. And I didn't know the guy, and he bet on me. He hired me. He was only a year and a half older than me, but he seemed so much wiser. And when I interviewed with him in his office, I couldn't believe how many hundreds of books he had just filled in his bookshelf. And it was an interview like nobody else. Mark Colosi is his name, and he started a company called ACC Long Distance Telecom Company. And he was one of the wisest people I'd ever met up until that point in my life. And the interview was different. The opportunity was presented differently. And I got excited for the first time in a while. And he continued that journey with me, growing me, developing me. And, it was an amazing journey because it didn't seem like I was growing and stretching at the time. But I look back on it now and realize that there was so much specialized knowledge that he was employing. And I didn't realize until many years later that he was being coached and mentored by Joe Gianni, our president CEO of Too Logical. Didn't know that at the time. But apparently what Mark was learning, he was instantly applying not only with me, but with other people and his company. The goal of his company was to grow and make it successful. And he figured out very quickly that to do that, you have to grow and make successful the people that work at the company. So I was 25 years old, and it felt like really the beginning of my professional journey, even though I'd been out in the workplace for a couple of years. The freshness and the newness of the conversations, the work culture and environment was such a stark contrast to anything else that had come before that. So I got fired up for like the first time in a couple of years. That was one of the first things I remember about the mentoring journey that I was going to continue for the rest of my professional life, it seems. So yeah, that's going back to, I think, to date myself, the mid-1980s, Sean.
Okay, mid-1980s. Well, you mentioned something there too that was very similar to my experience in meeting Joe, but you talked about, meeting Mark for the first time. You went in for the interview, and it was just different. It was just different than any of the interviews. It felt like a different opportunity. He felt different. What was that like? Because I kind of had the same thing. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but there was something different about Joe. And I think, you're kind of talking similar about something different about Mark, who obviously was being mentored by Joe at the time.
Well, yeah. And a couple of things that really, float to the top over and over again. And I've learned since that these are some of the best practices of mentoring and leading others in the home or the workplace. And what I found with it that Mark was great at, there was rarely a time when my self-defense mechanisms kicked in and my defenses raised, and I, kind of got passive aggressive or started defending or digging my heels in and fighting. That never really seemed to happen. And I look back on that and I wonder, and I realize now that really paying attention to situational awareness. Is the person, or am I ready to have this conversation right now? Or am I forcing it? Just waiting for the right timing, and in being able to read the room, situational awareness, they call it, of course, because timing is so important to important conversations, and you can't force it. So, that was one of the things that struck me. Rarely was there a time, with Mark back in those early days, or even now, that, I feel that a conversation is being forced. So I think that's a really important aspect, just situational awareness and reading the room as a leader and a mentor, so that your timing is going to be right. And one of the other things that I try to employ, and I look back, and when anybody does it to me, I kind of smile in recognition, letting other people speak first. Whether it's just simply by asking them an open-ended question, or just being comfortable with silence and letting them start. Or asking, a great open-ended question, hey, what have you liked most about the last month? Or what frustrated you most about the last month? Just getting me to talk first. And I guess that probably tied into the first aspect, which is all right, are they okay to have an important conversation right now? So starting with rapport and open-ended questions, letting me speak first, really, kind of probably got me to open up a lot more and felt more comfortable in the setting. It's funny you talk about different interviews and different onboarding. I'll never forget when, and this is the mid 1980s, but I think it was more like my first day of work than a job interview situation. But, Mark asked me to make a be, do, have list. And, it was the weirdest thing I'd ever done up until that time in my life professionally. I'm 25 years old. I'd never written a goal in my life. And, he asked me to bring a blank pad and a pen into his office for a meeting. And he had me write the word be on the first blank page, and then the word do on the second blank page, and the word have on the third blank page. And, I thought it was really weird. And he said, yeah, John, I'd like you to make a be, do, have list of the things you want to be, do, and have in your life. And then he left his own office, and I struggled mightily because I'd never written a goal before. And this is such a foreign thing to me. But then eventually I started writing, and it came from the heart. I wrote some things I really wanted to be, do, and have. And then he came back later and asked me about it. And he always put what I wanted first, and he helped me. And then, of course, eventually he would ask for things in return from me. But one of the things I've realized in both Mark Colosi and Joe Gianni is that approach, finding out what's important to others, making it important to them, and them bringing it up or them helping me to kind of let me know they cared. And that was huge because no other boss had done anything like that.
Is that what fired you up about it? Because you mentioned kind of, it was the first time in a few years that you felt excited about something, excited about something professionally. What was it, do you think, that kind of had you feeling that way?
Well, first of all, I wanted to do it for him. He took a big interest in me, and, obviously, it was his company. He wanted to make it successful. So I, wanted to go above and beyond for him. But it was those little extra things. I grew up playing soccer, went to college to play soccer, and, I still played soccer into my 50s. He would go to a game and bring his daughter. And, he just showed that he cared. We became friends, and we spent a lot of time together at work and then some time outside of work, but he just took a big interest, and that mattered. And that, I think, Sean, really, he knew that he had to change the way I looked at things. Because like most people at that age, 25 for me, I had flawed thinking, limited beliefs. I didn't see things as they really were. I saw them as flawed and limited, and mostly about myself, which, of course, how you see yourself is how you're going to see a lot of others. So if you see yourself with flaws, it's very easy to see others with flaws too. So very subtly, in those early days, Mark started presenting multiple ways of thinking about things. Now we can look at it this way, or we can look at it this way. And, what do you think? What do you think is best? And that was another thing that both Mark and Joe have done consistently, presented multiple ways of looking at things, and then asking me, what do you think will work out best? What do you think will help us the most? And, asking for my opinion or what do you think is such an empowering thing that a lot of leaders don't leverage. It's great if a boss thinks they're supposed to have all the great ideas, but they aren't. They're supposed to leverage their team, get every brain in the game. And even if it's your idea, but you plant the seed with somebody and then they formulate it and articulate it clearly and specifically, give them the credit. I mean, that's how you grow people. So those things were done for me for the very first time in my mid-20s there. And it really got me to think differently about myself. At that time, I'm sure I saw myself with flawed potential. I'm sure I didn't believe I had unlimited potential. I'm sure I put myself in a box. I can only do this. I can only be good at this, because that's what had been done to me. He never did that. And it was always about breaking barriers and limits. And, when I would put myself down in front of him, he'd say, I disagree. And yes, that You may not know this now. It doesn't mean you'll never not know it. And he would use examples from my own life about goals that I had set and accomplished, or how I had done in school or sports. I had already, graduated from university with honors and lived in Europe, but I kind of overlooked some of those milestones and didn't give myself enough credit. And I think, Sean, one of the most foundational things that I've learned from both of my mentors was the importance of cause and effect, that things don't happen by accident. And that the most important part of cause and effect is what we think and believe, because that impacts our behavior. As a matter of fact, it drives our behavior. So having optimal thoughts and beliefs really is the first step in our own growth and the building of the life that we want to lead. And because of those consistent ongoing things, teaching cause and effect, consequences of choosing this over that, but then the ongoing use of past success stories or the creation of future success stories, and the use of positive and empowering affirmations. Those two ongoing techniques really did serve to change my thinking and my whole belief structure about myself and others. So, I look fondly back at those, because it wasn't easy to change your thinking and challenge your own belief system, but it was the most, I guess, energetic and fulfilling part of my life, because I had to really change and pivot the direction, and then it happened.
Well, so I'm curious, and you mentioned a couple of them, but I wanted to do a little bit deeper dive, if you don't mind. Coming up, you kind of mentioned some of those kind of mental walls, limiting beliefs, things that Mark and Joe had to help you kind of see in a different way. And you mentioned a couple of the techniques they did that with, but what were some of those things that you felt, or in hindsight you're looking at, like you mentioned unlimited potential, you mentioned cause and effect, were those probably the two biggest, you think, that were maybe unoptimal before, that they kind of slowly but surely started to help you improve in those areas?
Yeah, you bet. Like many, and maybe it was a legacy from how I was raised, but, I probably believed at the age of 25 that success was born to a chosen select few people, and I wasn't one of them. And when I looked at successful people, I found a way to make it look like it was easy for them, like they got something I didn't get. At Too Logical, we teach people to detach themselves from the myths about success. And I was an advocate of the myths. I was a seller of the myths. I was a buyer of the myths. And, we know what they are. You got to be in the right place at the right time, to be successful. That's what I thought caused successful people. No, that's not based on cause and effect, and it's not true. That if it's meant to be, it should be easy, like they were natural and an overnight success. And, that kind of thinking tricks people into thinking that, the successful people got something we didn't get. That's why. So it's easy to make excuses and place blame. It's not what you know, it's who you know. There's another myth. Takes money to make money. Yeah, most really wealthy, successful entrepreneurs didn't start out with anything. So these myths that people buy into, which is lower level thinking and easy, and you might even find an example to attach to it. That my belief system was flawed and limited. I didn't think I had unlimited potential, which made me look down my nose at others. If I didn't have it, you don't have it either. So I can put you down and, make fun of your weaknesses and be critical, and all those things sprang from that. But none of that is true. Cause and effect happens, not in the material world, not just in the material world, but in the world of thoughts and beliefs. If we have flawed and limited beliefs, we're going to have flawed and limited actions. That's it. It's if this, then that. And, the thing about lower level thinking and flawed and limited beliefs, we didn't have them when we were born. We didn't have them as a 1 or a 2-year-old. We had high motivational intelligence. We were accountable. We didn't want somebody to walk for us. We wanted to learn how to do it ourselves. We wanted to learn how to talk. We paid the dues. We struggled. We made the hundreds or thousands of mistakes learning how to talk or walk. We earned it. And, that's what high motivational intelligence is, as we know. Well, we're all gifted with it at birth. And then it gets kind of conditioned out. And we almost have to allow ourselves to be impacted by another person, a mentor, to help us see that we're looking through our life with a cloudy lens, and we don't need to. And we can polish it every day and see ourselves and the world more clearly. And we have everything we need to build the life that we dream of. So, these tools about being goal-directed and having a list, understanding the impact of cause and effect, and our thoughts and beliefs matter. And then understanding consequences. Those are really important cornerstones for any mentor to be teaching the people that they care about, whether it's their children, their friends or family members, or their colleagues at work. And it's a gift, I think. When you're free thinking, when you have no limits or artificial barriers, the possibilities just start to present themselves a whole lot more frequently.
Well, you mentioned something too that I think is important. I think it's something that I definitely discounted early in my life, in my journey, just the importance of mentors, and you talked about how, and this is kind of your experience with Mark, your experience with Joe, my experience with Joe for sure, my experience with you, with Dave, has been such that we don't even recognize some of these limits that we're putting on ourselves. And we get better and better at it the more aware we become. But still, at a certain point, there are still levels of blind spots, as Joe always describes them, that we can't necessarily see in ourselves. And it's something that I think early on I looked at as a weakness, I guess, in a lot of ways, that you would need somebody else to point it out, that, I could figure this out by myself. And honestly, the more aware I've become, the more aware I've become of my need for mentors and outside perspectives to give me some of that, that I can't necessarily see myself. So I'm curious for you, what was it like? You mentioned early on, obviously, Mark being a great mentor to you. You didn't know at the time that he was being mentored by Joe. What was it like kind of first meeting Joe, and how did that kind of interaction happen? And what was the kind of early mentoring journey with Joe like?
Well, yeah, it was in the 1980s that Mark and a couple other guys started ACC long distance, and then a year or two later, I joined the company. And it was at that time, Mark was a founder of this company, and he was a young man, and he knew he needed some guidance and help. So he had sought out Joe Gianni and kind of retained him as an executive coach. And they were meeting on their own, and I didn't meet Joe in the 80s at all. But when I first met Mark, he was not only an avid reader about history and business and success and personal development, he loved to teach. He told me in the very early days, he said, John, I don't want to do telecommunications for the rest of my career. As a matter of fact, when I'm done with this, I'm going to start a training and development company. And he even said, and he goes, it's going to be about all of this. And he points to all the books on the bookshelves of his office. And he goes, and I'm going to call it Eagle something or other, because an eagle's a strong and solid symbol, and nobody names their company after a duck. He was a big outdoorsman, so there was a lot of hunting and fishing metaphors. But he founds ACC long distance, I think, in 1983. I joined in 1985, and AT&T buys the company, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And he starts Eagle Productivity Solutions in like 1992 or 1993. And he calls me up and says, hey, would you like to join me again? And, you were really good at hiring and training salespeople, and I'm going to start this training company. Want to join me? And I said, yeah, you bet. So I switched industries from telecommunications to training and development. And it was in the 90s because, of course, he stayed friends and contacts with Joe Gianni, and he's starting a new company. So he brings Joe in to help with the launch of Eagle. And that's when I first met Joe and started working a little bit with him as well as through Mark, and the consistency that I saw and the same language, insight, and tools that were being used. I kind of made the connection fairly quickly. And what was really great for me, I think, Sean, was that this is not just one person that is thinking and moving this way. There's more. And then it was through Joe and through others that he had worked with that I started realizing this is the way to think and believe. And if you can really organize this and scale it, you can create unstoppable companies. So I really started to get that message. And then I realized that, this motivational intelligence is the fuel that all entrepreneurs have used to create their dream, to breathe life into it. And not just entrepreneurs, any great leader, any great philosopher, any great parent has come to these same conclusions, most likely. And it's, and as you know, we do what we do all over the world. And I've done it on 6 continents. When I go to a new place, I study the philosophers and the writers from that culture. And it's amazing the consistency around the world and around the cultures about the best way to think and believe about us and how we get on with others. So it's been a magical journey. And of course, the world is woefully lacking of leadership. So we got a lot of work still to do.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up a good point, which I'm glad you mentioned, which was, a big kind of realization in terms of meeting Joe for the first time was, seeing the consistency between him and Mark, and kind of the realization that there's more people like this, and that, and that kind of gives you some confidence that, okay, this can be learned. It's not just this one person that is special. There's a knowledge base here that, I maybe don't understand yet, or I'm starting to understand, but it's really easy, I think, early on. I know for me, it was really easy to think early on, like, oh, it's just Joe. It's just this one person that is like this. That is, I can't describe it. I don't know what to attribute it to, but it's just, he's special. And I think that's an interesting part of this journey too, is as you meet more people. And, he had obviously mentored you for a long time. He'd mentored Dave for a long time. So then I met the two of you afterwards. And then it was kind of the same kind of a thing, like, oh, there's more of them. And, obviously everybody has their own story in terms of how they got to that evolution. Joe talks about his mentor, Randy, all the time. But I think that's it was a big aha, I think, for me, was exactly what you said, that there's more of them. And for the most part, which you're kind of talking about now, they didn't have it figured out at the beginning. I think that's an easy thing to attribute to, that, oh, this person is, and you talked about the myths of success, and particularly in this realm, I think easy to say, like, oh, they're just special. They're just this way. And it's natural to them. And I could never. And then you talk to all of these people, and they talk about similar journeys and similar stories like you have, that I was over here, and this is kind of the journey, and somebody took an interest in me, and all the techniques that they used along the way. But I think that's such a big light bulb that you don't realize early on.
Yeah. And it's, if anybody is ever concerned about, who's a role model, is there an example I can follow? Just go find a 1 or a 2-year-old child, because that is the best, one of the best examples of high motivational intelligence, which is, they are goal-directed. They take initiative. They have high self-confidence and self-esteem. They believe in themselves. They're not afraid to look anybody in the eye. They will ask difficult questions, curious questions. If they don't like the answer they get, they won't give up. They'll just keep asking, They'll change decision makers. I mean, they're so dauntless and resolute in their aspirations. It blows me away to see that in a 1 or a 2-year-old. And then it starts to get lowered. The bar gets lowered. And whatever, we don't get an operating manual with the child when we bring them home from the hospital. But, parents shouldn't be passing on their flawed and limited beliefs, which they often do, without recognizing it. How they give feedback, what they give feedback around, starts to whittle away at this high motivational intelligence that we're born with. And it, eventually can turn into excuse making and finger pointing and giving up quickly and just looking for the downside in everything instead of the upside. And it just can be habitual that, of course, may get passed on to the next generation. So, we need a big intervention. And, of course, we do it one-to-one, one-to-many, and we like to do it with all of our clients. And the nice thing about what we do, Sean, as you know, is that a lot of this is replicatable in the home. And I think that gives us a lot more opportunities to practice, but also as a reminder that when we're trying to help ourselves or others think better and bigger, it's not easy. And, some of the things that I learned that gave me, growing pains on my journey that's still continuing is I was very comfortable seeing the world through flawed and limited lenses. I put myself down because I never studied math or science, and I wasn't good at building things or fixing things. So I avoided those things in my adulthood. And I gave myself a pass, and I accepted lower level results in those areas where I didn't have a really good belief system about myself. And I would do that with others too. But when you're on a mentoring journey and you're the mentee, you have to come to the conclusion that my belief system was flawed and limited about myself and others. And I found examples that could support those beliefs. But the goal of mentoring is to elevate somebody's beliefs. And that means they have to let go of some of their flawed and limited thinking. And it's very hard for people to do that because they are comfortable with that thinking. And then they have to admit they were wrong as to how they initially see things. And, Sean, as you and I both know, the initial way we look at something is probably flawed. It's probably not the optimal way. It's probably the easiest way to look at something or a person or a circumstance. But the easiest is rarely, if ever, the optimal way to look at something. So really looking for the best way to think or believe about ourselves or others, it's hard. It's a heavy lift of mental effort. So, it takes a lot of spaced repetition, and as for the mentors of the world, a lot of patience, forgiveness, and time and effort, and faith that that person will come to see themselves and things differently.
To your point, you mentioned before kind of, looking to the 1-2-year-old as a example of high motivational intelligence, I think, which highlights that, we're born this way, and then we kind of start to learn some of these flawed beliefs. That so much of this journey with motivational intelligence is just as much about unlearning as it is learning. And I think that's been something that I've recognized too, like kind of like you said, you have to let go of a lot of your past views, your past perspectives, your past beliefs about yourself, about other people, about how the world works. And that unlearning process, I think, is what is difficult for people, because even if they understand these things, we talk all the time about, the difference between knowing something intellectually versus knowing something viscerally, really believing it, knowing it in your bones. And so even if as you learn some of these things early on, it's one thing to understand it intellectually, but it's another to unlearn the other way that you were looking at this and really embrace this new perspective, this new belief about whatever it is, yourself, your job, your company, the world, the industry. So what was that unlearning process like for you? I know for me, like it's kind of like the best way I could describe it is like a mental wrestling match, where you're getting all of this input and feedback about this new way of looking at things, but you're instinctively kind of resisting and fighting to an extent. What was that process like for you as you kind of needed to let go of some of the past or flawed or unoptimal ways of thinking about things and embrace something new?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There's a lot of leadership tools that we can use on ourselves and others that impact our attitude and mindset. Two of those most powerful tools are the stories that we tell ourselves over and over again, the stories that we tell about ourselves to others. And we all have success stories. We all have mistake stories. We have stories that can reinforce why we're flawed, why we're not good at a certain activity or subject. But we all have stories that affirm that we're good at change, that we can learn and master new things. And, we have to use affirmations and success stories that optimize our journey, our path, instead of put roadblocks in it. And, we can recall our biggest mistakes and embarrassments at the top of the ledger, or we can put those somewhere else on the ledger and put our successes, our breakthroughs, the things that we've learned. I mean, every year we get incrementally better, many things, and we don't give ourselves credit for those things, for our incremental improvement, which is leveraging our unlimited potential. Every year, I hope people make mistakes because we learn more from them than our successes. Mistakes are okay as long as we don't repeat them and we learn and leverage them. And if we're not making mistakes, we're not pushing ourselves. So they're okay. Changing the way we look at mistakes, not beating ourselves up, actually learning from them. So, we can judge ourselves and beat ourselves up, or we can be our best teacher. We all have weaknesses that we have avoided in our life until we couldn't any further. And one of the most powerful things about all of us is that we have built our life turning weaknesses into strengths every year. We don't give ourselves credit for that. Obviously after the pandemic, as professionals, we all had to get better at video chats. And now even some of us old dogs that aren't very good because we didn't grow up with technology, we're masters, not only at the Zoom platform, but Teams, and there's other ones, WebEx out there. So it's magical. If we just look at ourselves and our journey through the right lens, we see a whole different picture. Obviously, the last couple of years may have been difficult for a lot of folks and a lot of organizations. That's what creates innovation and creativity. Difficulty, aggressive deadlines, being understaffed or under-resourced. These things can be advantages if we look at them that way. So how we look at things really does matter. And most people in their professional and personal lives don't aim too high and miss. They actually aim too low and hit. And that's the biggest challenge I think, leaders like you and I face and companies like 2Logical face. That's the first challenge. We have to change the way people look at their world because they're looking at it through, flawed, dirty lenses. And the first step a leader or mentor does is clean those off. And of course, I've had the great fortune of having two, world-class mentors impact me in my life.
Yeah. So what do you think it was for you that, looking at some of those, like you said, you've embraced new beliefs, new ways of looking at things, new perspectives. In order to do that, you had to let go of, some of those old, less optimal ways of thinking about things or thinking about yourself. What do you think it was that really got you to a point where you were willing to let go of the way you looked at things? Was it looking at, I'm sick of where I am and maybe this will help me get there? Was it just kind of a trust and faith in Mark and in Joe that they were leading you in the right direction? What do you think it was that kind of put you in a spot where, okay, I'm willing to embrace this new way of thinking, I'm willing to kind of let go of, for lack of a better way to put it, my baggage?
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I think you hit on all the major ones, but the most important one, Sean, was I didn't like myself. I was hard on myself. I was very critical, for a lot of different reasons. I look back on it. I was really good at putting any idea or person down. I was busy most of the day, beating myself up. So I got really good at it and I could do it with others too. And, I was kind of like a bully that way where I could be critical of anything, your look, your comments, your ideas. And, that's, I eventually realized that's not the reputation I want to have. And, Mark helped me understand that, I could use my mental time and energy and make a difference, or I could use my mental time and energy and harm myself and others. I could lower the bar. And it was, he goes, you decide. I mean, that goes back to the consequences thing, is you decide where you deploy your mental time and energy. And I started to realize I was using it to make other people feel bad about themselves. we know that the bully is miserable and doesn't like themselves, and misery loves company. So why not, try to get everybody below the line and, commiserating in misery. And, it's, I, and I realized it probably first from Mark's example that, he had a tougher upbringing than me. He had more siblings than me. I only had to share a bedroom with, two brothers. He had to share a bed with a brother, I mean, so it was like his example on his positivity and having a positive mental attitude. It's hard work. I mean, it doesn't come naturally as to adults. It comes naturally to children, but adults allow their mind to get conditioned to lower level thinking. So it takes a lot of daily effort, and the daily effort that we have to apply is what we say to ourselves over and over again. I mean, we've authored our inner voice. Most people don't even listen to it anymore. They just follow it. But we have to take control of what we say to ourselves over and over again, because we are congruent with our dominant thoughts. We behave that way. So really starting to challenge myself on my flawed or limited thinking. Why did I have such positive and optimal thinking in this part of my life, but lower, less than optimal thinking in a different part of my life? Why was that? So really slowing down, becoming a little bit more introspective, and of course, the habit of reflection that, first Mark taught to me, and then of course Joe reinforced, and we do that with our clients. And heck, I can't help doing it every day. And I've done it with my kids ever since they were little. It is just thinking at the end of the day or the week, what did I do well? First and foremost, slowing ourselves down. It's getting harder and harder to do that because there's so many things trying to compete for our attention. What did I do well today or this week? What didn't I do well or avoid? What can I do better next week? I mean, those three questions in that sequence is how we process our day, our week. And you think about it, the first question draws out successes, incremental improvement. Yes, we are making progress. When we feel more confident, we have the ability to look at the other side. What are we avoiding? What aren't we doing well? And then, of course, the third question, what can we do better tomorrow or next week? We got proactive improvement on the backside. I mean, it's like, that's daily mental vitamins right there. So, really trying to hold yourself accountable to higher level thinking, it's hard, but it is the most rewarding journey that we could ever put ourselves on. So, yeah, no, it'll continue for life, as you know, Sean. You're well into the journey now, and you can't help but recognize the optimal in others and the less than optimal. I mean, that's another benefit about really being aware. I think as a leader, you start to recognize it in others for good and for not so good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. It's been for me. I think one of the unique things about this journey is that once you learn it and you go through some of those growing pains, you start to see it everywhere. You start to see it in everyone. And early on, in the process that we, have some of those blind spots, we don't necessarily see that. And like you said, it's easy for us to slip into unoptimal lower levels of thinking. And that's where, the misery loves company and all those kinds of things. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but, just to kind of put a bow on this part of the conversation, the thing that you kind of felt like helped you kind of let go and embrace some of these new areas was, one, the guidance of mentors, Mark and Joe, and two, kind of seemed like what they did is frame this almost as an identity choice. That who do you want to be? Do you want to be this person or that person? And the choice is up to you. So that kind of was ultimately the place that they led you to, that kind of got you to click in.
Yeah, wow, that's well put, Sean. And if somebody wants to help you, they can't just put down what you're thinking and what you're doing now and say, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. No, they have to give you what to consider that you should have done or you could have done. It's providing an option, an opportunity to think or behave differently. It's not just putting down the current state It's about creating a better, more optimal way of thinking and doing. And, I think that's what they did. They said, you got to let go of this stuff. By the way, here's something else you can grab onto. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be better and it's going to pull you up. So giving those alternate choices, I think, was the key. Well, you can continue to think about it this way if you want. I wonder what that's going to lead to. Or you can get uncomfortable and start thinking differently about it. And if that gets traction, what can that lead to? This new thinking is difficult. It doesn't come easy. It doesn't come right away. It takes a whole lot of effort. But once we get it, once we get enough traction or hit the tipping point, as Malcolm Gladwell would say, then it's there. It's locked. So yes, I think that the habitual presenting of options to take got me to start to realize that the right option is the more difficult one. It is the one less chosen, but it's the right one, and it's not going to be easy, but it's the right one. So, that really started to make a difference. And then, I started to realize I could become a better man, and I could become a better leader in the workplace. I could become a better friend and family member, because I met Mark long before I got married and had children. So that was a gift to them that they received in their future. But I felt excited and empowered because of the conversations, because of the way that Mark and then Joe have managed and led me.
Yeah. I think it does, Joe always describes it as unlocking people. And I think I always love that analogy because it's just feels very fitting, at least from my experience, that you do unlock in a lot of ways. At least for me, like my mind was very much a pretzel, all kind of tied up, and you don't even realize how much you're resisting or fighting or how much you're holding yourself back until he kind of dials in that combination with you that gets you to kind of embrace this new way of thinking. And then it is kind of like things are unlocked, and that you do go kind of from seeing things in black and white to seeing things in color. And then you do have this sense of possibility after once you embrace that. The middle part is difficult, but can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know what it's been like for me, and it's something that continually Joe's always pushing me to think about things a little bit differently or think about things a little bit more optimally. This has been going on for 10 years and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. But every time you kind of come out the other side of that, there's the kind of this sense of energy, this sense of optimism, this sense of possibility. What's it been like for you once you did embrace some of these new ways of thinking? What was that feeling like? What happened from there? What did you change about how you were doing things on a day-to-day basis, or just your general approach?
Yeah, no, it was impactful. It didn't come overnight. It has been gradual, and the momentum has only picked up and continued, and I think the impact has as well. Because of a lot of the research that we've done, as you know, through how the human mind was created and the 3 different types of human intelligence, we do know that we have, as humans, a bias to the negative. We do know that our oldest emotion is fear. Our second oldest emotion is anger. So we have this bias to the negative, to lower level thinking, because when we developed it, it protected us. We don't need it anymore, but we have it. It's in play. And, higher level thinking is just harder to organize, embrace, and repeat. Why, making an excuse is far easier than, trying to figure out a workaround. So we have to understand that this way of thinking as adults is rare and it takes a lot of effort. And those that embrace it are looked at as people with specialized knowledge. And anybody, this is born to all. So anybody can take themselves and put themselves on this journey. But I'll tell you some of the things that it has really helped me. My siblings will readily agree on how their brother has changed over the years. My default now is looking for the best in people and situations. It's the opposite of what it was. And it is profound, it is powerful, it is uplifting for me. you know, as well as maybe those in my sphere of influence. But it's win or learn every day. And I mean, I know that's my motto, and I've been saying that, for many decades, but it's the truth. I mean, every day can be put into that category, the win or the learn category. Both are positive. So that means every day is positive. It took me many, many years to get to that simple conclusion. I am far less critical and judgmental than I used to be. And, one of my beliefs is the difference between judgment and empathy is knowing the backstory. So I'm really curious about people's backstory, how they got to be where they are and who they are. Because everybody's got one. And it really explains a lot. One of the other things that I think happens if anybody puts themselves on this journey is you start to realize some of the flaws and limits of those people that you spend a lot of time around have. And you can clearly start to see what is holding them back. And it's how they see themselves, or how they see their job, or it's how they see their future. Those things are so important to recognize if we're going to be a mentor and help that person see what we see, that there is another way that they can think about that subject, and really starting to have conversations and ask questions about it. And those conversations might not be easy, but they're so important. And if you care about somebody, and you might misspeak or struggle, but still you have to have the conversation. And, when I got married and had kids, I knew a lot of this stuff. So I really tried to apply it. And it was really still hard, even though you're working with children, And, we started playing high-low at the dinner table. I think the kids were 5 and 3, and we're going around the table talking about the highlight of the day and the low light of the day. And, we got Hasty family mottos on their fridge. That's the culture that we wanted. I developed high payoff activities for being a dad, being a husband, and, really trying to work some of this at home, especially on children that don't have any pre-formations. And, just the simple concept of we give no complaints without suggestions is something that my kids believe in, and they're very good at making suggestions on improvement instead of just complaining. Hopefully that'll make them really good employees. Having a be, do, have list is such an important thing, because it's about your goals, how you want to live the life that you're authoring, being goal directed. These are things that I've taken, from what we teach in our journey regarding motivational intelligence, and I apply them at home, at work. And I don't know, I think it's a lot simpler than I originally made it out, Sean, at the beginning of this journey.
Yeah, it always seems to be, we tend to overcomplicate things. The same way. We think this is so much more complicated than it is. And that's probably a lot of the excuses or the past ways of thinking of, well, it couldn't possibly be that simple. It couldn't possibly be that straightforward. There's got to be more to it. And, the simplicity of it, I think, a lot of times comes as a surprise through the process.
Yeah. To that point, you talk about the simplicity of it. I'll just give you one reminder from one of our clients about the power of simplification. So Becton Dickinson, one of our longtime clients, big medical device firm, huge firm, global, and very important business, and they're probably the best in their industry. I was at a seminar where the COO, John Wieland, was giving a talk, and it was only going to be 25 minutes. And this guy, looks like he walks off of, the CEO weekly cover, and just a very sharp, polished gentleman, very successful, dressed in a really nice, well-fitting suit. He gets up there, but he was a very plain-spoken, almost like a country gentleman type of a thing. And he got up and he started talking to the group. And they were all senior sales leaders. And I was going to do a learning day after this kickoff by this executive, John Wieland. And he said, I only got one slide to show you and one thing to talk about for the next 25 minutes, but it is the most important metric we have here at the company. As a matter of fact, this metric impacts every other business metric that we have. So that's why it's the most important. And then he, has somebody put up a slide, and on the slide is this round dial. And it was a bad picture. I mean, it was a bad looking slide. It looked like it was the dial of an old speedometer from an old car, because it was just a bunch of numbers and a red needle in the middle. It was just a dial. And he puts up the slide and he said, "This is the most important metric that we have at our company." And everybody's kind of looking at each other going, "What?" And then he goes to the guy that's using the laptop down at the bottom of the stage, and he goes like that. And obviously that meant to hit the build. So the guy on the laptop hits the build slide, and it's the same slide. The dial is on it, but the build comes up with something written underneath the dial. And all it said was, "Give a shit-a-meter." That's all it said. And he said, "This is the most important metric we have in our company. It drives our culture. It drives our customer satisfaction. It drives our employee satisfaction. It drives our shareholder satisfaction. This drives everything." And then he spoke for 20, 25 minutes from the heart about caring about what you do. And it was like, we can over-complexify something. I don't even think that's a word, but I over-complexified it. Or we can simplify it. And this was 8 or 10 years ago this happened. I'm still moved. I can still put myself back in the room and feel the emotion from those list of senior leaders. Leading by example, I mean, that is such a powerful example of so many things about leadership, but really caring about what you do. And when you're in front of somebody that cares about what they do, you know it. I mean, that pretty much comes through. So how do we ignite that in everybody? I think is a huge, important part of leadership, and to create a culture, a company culture of that, of caring about what you do for each other, for the customers, the marketplace, and everything else. So yeah, we can make it complex and hard to remember and understand, or we can simplify it.
Yeah. I love that example because, again, we do tend to overcomplicate these things. But at the end of the day, you know, that CEO is coming in and saying, if people don't give a shit, nothing else really matters.
Yeah, and the marketplace will know, the customers will know, and eventually our stock price will know.
Exactly. Well, and I think you kind of talked about, and I think that's a good kind of, you know, segue is you talked about how you really started, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, you know, with those first couple of jobs, you know, your give a shit meter was probably pretty low, just from a personal level.
Yeah.
And it was,
and I'm sure that came through in the first few minutes too.
Well, and it was really starting to be, you know, your eyes starting to be open around motivational intelligence and your relationship with Mark and with Joe that made the meter start to go up.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
you know, even you mentioned a couple of things like it, you know, you looked for the good in situations and people, you know, now much more than then. And, you know, you became a lot less critical, less judgmental. You learned the backstory of these people. You were, even just in the beginning journey with Mark, you were excited about the opportunity. You were excited about the possibility. And I think that's just naturally what happens. At least that's what's happened for me. I think it sounds like it's what happened for you through this process, is at the end of it, and that really there is no end, but as you progress, the give a shit meter just starts going way up because you start to recognize the opportunity that you have, and that, you know, life just becomes so much more interesting when you do care.
Yeah. And you start doing the maximum, not the minimum. You start doing things sooner rather than later. And it just all starts to get traction and move forward. And then the cool thing is we take the mindset. It's not just about what we're doing at work. We take the same mindset to other areas of our life. You know, I continually ask myself at home as well as work, as I look at my to-do list, because, you know, that's still a great way to manage your day, because you can't trust your memory and most of your good ideas come at the wrong time. You have to have a list of stuff that you want to do. I mean, it's your list of intentions at home and at work. And when you look at an item, you should say, should I do this? And the answer might be no. And if the answer is yes, you should have follow-up questions. What's the best time to do it? What's the best way to do it? Can I combine it with something else on my list to create some efficiency? This way of thinking can actually cascade into every area of your life. I mean, you can be efficient everywhere if you choose and if you believe you can. So, I mean, it's had a compounding impact in other areas of my life. And, I feel empowered in other areas of life and including areas that I had a tendency to ignore because, I didn't think myself good at those things. So I would just avoid them and let it go. And I gave myself a pass on being accepting of lower level results in that part of my life because I had lower level thinking in that part of my life. So yeah, the impact has been profound and compounded over the years. Don't see it stopping.
Yeah. Well, and how do you mentioned kind of even a lot of the personal things and how it's made a difference, just for your own kind of life experience. What kind of difference do you feel like it's made just in terms of your interactions with people or maybe like how you're perceived, whether it's in the workplace, going into a company or just, social settings? How do you think your perception or your, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of personal brand has evolved from kind of where you started to where you are now?
Well, yeah, no, I think the people that have known me for a long time and the people that haven't known me for very long, have a different perspective, but the people that have known me for a long time have seen quite a change, which then creates curiosity. And then maybe they start to lean in and, because they know my story. The newer folks see hopefully a sage, wise, old guy that has a young mental age because we can pick our mental age, but, hopeful, positive, upbeat. Those are the things that I try as my brand to convey. And I hope people pick up on them. I hope they realize that, I care and I'm curious and I got follow-up questions I want to ask. And I'm grateful, the simplicity of staying above the line, which of course is exhibiting the higher levels of human emotion. It's so important to have that as a personal brand. So many people live below the line with, revenge and hate and lacking accountability and excuses and lower level thinking. I mean, that's easy. Anybody can do that. It takes, a 1 or 2 or 3-year-old child or a very aware adult to really focus on the optimal way to see themselves and their world. And it's the truth. I mean, the saddest thing, Sean, might be that what many people think and believe is not true. It's flawed. It's, most people don't believe they have unlimited potential. Now, if they have a brain disease, that could be true. But if they don't, it's not true because we all can get better day over day, week over week. It's called unlimited potential. Until we have a brain injury or brain disease, we got it. So people that think they don't are wrong. And they're harming themselves because of it. And that's sad. And that's sad. I'm sure they're passing it on. I'm sure they're passing it on to the next generation.
Yeah.
And that's even sadder.
Yeah.
So, maybe, slowing down and the world is going against us on this, Sean. I mean, slowing down and having better daily habits about reflecting, about planning is the way to go. I know it's old school. It's like, Emerson and Thoreau stuff, but, still works. It still works. And it might actually work better because the world is so busy competing for our attention, for our mind. And so many people are allowing it to happen and they don't have to. So they're not doing their own thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great way to put it. They're not doing their own thinking. I think that's another thing I think I've recognized through the journey is just how much of this I picked up, of my flawed thinking I had picked up just through osmosis, that I hadn't really decided that's how I wanted to think about myself or think about the world. It kind of just happened. And I didn't maybe really make a full decision about that's how I wanted to look at things or that's how I wanted to view myself. And as soon as you kind of, to your point earlier on about identity, you decide who you want to be. The choice obviously becomes pretty obvious for most people. But the thing that, is sad is that most people don't recognize they have the ability to choose and that these are malleable. And I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, is because it's easy to look at somebody like yourself. You're up, you're speaking, you're working with, high level executives, you're speaking in front of hundreds or thousands of people. And it's easy to look at somebody like you and say, oh, this guy just has it all figured out. He's always had it all figured out. And that there's no way I could ever possibly. And, I think that's important to recognize that it is a journey. It's a journey for everybody, because if you don't recognize that, it's easy to just say, well, that's John, but it couldn't be me. And, to recognize that from where you started to where you are now, I think gives people some faith that this can be learned. You can improve in these areas, because without understanding, kind of to your point, the backstory, it's just easy to write a lot of these people off, where they meet somebody like you or meet somebody like Joe or Mark or Dave or any of the clients or anybody that you work with. It's easy to write it off as a possibility that you could possibly get there.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with that. And that's part of the problem. The closer you look at anybody that has achieved noteworthy success, the more you will see difficulty, the more you will see challenge, the more you will see things that others got that they didn't. But then it's through difficulty that people often realize there's a better way to think about things. Now, a lot of people go through a lot of difficulty and get beat up and beat down for good, but there's others that interpret it differently and use it as a catalyst. And that's a good thing. Being disadvantaged on some level throughout history has actually led to a lot of success, because, just like a small company is trying to compete against the majors, they have to be more innovative and creative. They have to be more nimble because they're small and unknown. I mean, wow, that's an advantage to me and to us, of course. So, there's usually, and I almost said always, but I try to avoid absolutes. There is usually a better way to look at things, and seeking that perspective and then turning it into a much more positive expectation. It is really high motivational intelligence in its simplest form. And that's what we can all get better at in the coming years. And, whatever. And every time we try to evolve and pivot, we only got two options that are going to happen. We're either going to win or we're going to learn both positive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, John, I appreciate having this conversation. My thought is maybe we could do a part two. I wanted to cover in this conversation your own personal journey, because, kind of like I said, I think that's an important piece of this to highlight and for people to understand what this process is like, that if you are going through this or you're learning some of these things and you find yourself resisting it, or you find yourself with looking at things, in a non-optimal way, that's normal and part of the process and part of the growing pains. But sticking with it and getting out the other side is absolutely worth it. So I wanted to start with this conversation, but maybe in a part two, we could talk about, which we didn't really cover in depth here. Like you said, you've been on 6 continents. You've done this for a long time. You've worked with 40% of the Fortune 500. You've worked with startups. You've worked with emerging companies in every function you could think of. So maybe we could talk in a part two about what it's been like to really teach this and mentor people on it, and what you've seen that process is like, because I think that's another interesting conversation for us to have.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's cool, because when you impact many, what we've been talking about is one-on-one stuff. But when you start talking about one to many, when you, I guess, infuse many with motivational intelligence in this way of thinking, and many adopt what's possible organizationally. Yeah, that's great. That sounds like our agenda for our next talk, Sean.
All right. Sounds good to me. I like it. All right. Thanks, John.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by 2Logical, a global top 20 training firm and the world leader in motivational intelligence development. We partner with leading executives to build the #1 talent pool in their industry. We've worked with over 40% of the Fortune 500 in 97 countries worldwide, and maybe we'll work with you next. To try our world-renowned executive coaching service for free, start a free trial of Mojo at joinmojo.com/trial. That's joinmojo.com/trial. You'll get unlimited access to the Mojo platform, custom onboarding, and 2 live coaching sessions free of charge. So, if you want to unlock even greater leadership presence and executive effectiveness, reclaim more of your time, and really build something special, get started with your free trial today at joinmojo.com/trial. That's joinmojo.com/trial.
And the more I studied it, the more I began to see that that was the overwhelming commonality of the most successful people that I ever met.
And just the empowerment of the conversations, how it just really motivates you. You don't come across people that impact you that way.
Because a lot of people could say to me, oh yeah, no, I get it. But yet they really don't get it.
This, if you really lean into it, can be life-changing.
Mojos is part of our DNA and what we do during team meetings.
And I just looked at Randy like, oh my God.
I feel like that's made a lot of impact in my direct report's life because they're not afraid to talk to me.
But I started to see what this gentleman said in the podcast. And I was like, it was just kind of surreal because it was almost like he foreshadowed what I was going to be up against.
They would come in every week and ask me, Paul, how far would you like to get? That's when I told them 105%. And they laughed and I said, no, 105% is where I'm going to be.
I think that concept is one that everybody can buy into, and saying that I can improve 1% from yesterday.
An unstoppable state of mind that enables you and I to achieve everything that we want out of our professional and our personal life.